have a story that I want to tell you about a Yid whose yahrzeit is tomorrow, Rabbi Yitzchak Gansberg, who happens to be the grandfather of the sponsor of the shir. So I want to share this story as a Purim story, and it actually ties in quite well to the substance of what we're going to be learning tonight in the shir. Rabbi Yitzchak Gansberg, was a very young man when the Rebbe became Rebbe. He actually got married the year before the Friedrich passed away, before the Pivis ever passed away. And he was a very serious person. And he caught on to the revolution of Ufaratsta that the Rebbe was making very quickly. And from what I understand, he adapted. He literally made himself into a new person. He made himself into what we would call a Yid of the Deira Shvi. Anybody who knew him and merited to get one of his incredibly affectionate punches knew that this was not a man who was ever at rest. And in his incredibly successful life, he did extraordinary things. He built schools. He was involved in tzach. And he spent the last several decades of his life involved indirectly in Mochan Chana, living in Crown Heights next to the Rebbe, doing all kinds of wonderful things. And he was always coming up with new ideas. A very creative man. Some of his ideas were pretty crazy. And some of the ideas seemed crazy and turned out to be quite wonderful. One of his mishigasan was that he had this idea to drop leaflets from an airplane or from a helicopter on Purim to announce a Yom Tif to the community. And he understood that if you drop leaflets out of a plane, he'll reach a much, much broader group of people than he could if he would go around handing them out. So we had this idea that he would rent an airplane and he would fly over a particular city in Eretz Yisrael and drop thousands of leaflets about the Yom Tif. In that case, it was Purim. And he would reach more people than he could ever reach otherwise. The problem was renting a plane was very expensive. It was not within their budget. And of course, his second thought was to shelf the idea. But then, if he had shelved the idea, then Yitzchak Gansberg would not have been Yitzchak Gansberg. So, he had plan B. He decided to find a sponsor. And that the sponsor would have an advertisement on the back of the leaflet, and they would pay for the plane. But he was a bit uncertain. So his father-in-law, Rabbi Briel Khan's father, was on Agashet, was in New York for Purim at that time. So he communicated with his father-in-law to ask the Rebbe about the idea, and the Rebbe approved it on the condition that the organization, that the business that they would be partnering with, that would sponsor it, would be the kind of organization that it was appropriate for them to advertise on a Chabad leaflet. They found a kosher wine that they used, and they paid for the airplane, and they would drop these leaflets, and there'd be an advertisement for the kosher wine, and they would be able to advertise Purim. As he got closer to the date, he realized that he wanted to put a sicha into the pamphlet, and he didn't know what sicha to put. So he again communicated with Maskiros that the Rebbe should choose which particular sicha they should put in the flyer. And when he did it, he went up in an airplane and he dropped these leaflets, and he watched people chase them down. He says he dropped leaflets over Bnei Brak, and they fell in a suburb, and he thought that it was like a waste. And then he saw hundreds of people going to pick them up. And he imagined the idea of people running to grab Torah when Mashiach is going to come. That was his feeling as he watched people run to grab what amounted to sichas of the Rebbe. The end of the story is this went on for many years. Every Purim he did the same thing, and one year there was an instruction from the Rebbe to stop, and he didn't know why. Of course, they stopped, and he inquired, and the answer that he got was that there was already, I guess, closer to the 6-Day War, or after the 6-Day War, and Jews were so weary of anything flying in the sky, that the Rebbe felt that putting another airplane in the sky, dropping papers, would give people something else to worry about, and he felt that it was preferred not to use this method, rather than add one more little bit of fear to the lives of the Jewish people living in the Holy Land, which, of course, doesn't have to be explained. It's a story of incredible sensitivity. So here's the story. Now, how does it tie into tonight's class? To be very direct, tonight's class is about susim, it's about horses. The relationship between susim and purim, between horses and purim, is well known. You know, there are many Chassidim, when they talked about purim, we talk about the fed, horses. And in context, an airplane and a horse is a very, very, very appropriate parallel or analogy, and I'll tell you why. Let's talk about the Megillah, right? And the Megillah says that you have a horse, a feld. Where do you have a horse in the Megilas Esther? Where Haman is up all night building the gallows, thinking that he's going to use it for Mordechai. That same night, Achashverosh cannot sleep. So Haman is busy, Achashverosh is sleepy, is busy. Pardon me. Haman is looking forward to ousting an enemy. Achashverosh is paranoid. And of course, Haman shows up at the palace. Achashverosh lets him in. And he asks Haman, L'miyach beitz hamelech, ma laseis bo'ish asher hamelech chafetz bikari. What should be done to a man the king wishes to honor? So of course, Haman thinks to himself, L'miyach beitz hamelech laseis yikar yeser mimeni. To whom would the king wish to do honor more than to me? And he therefore lays it on. Yavi levush malchus. They should bring a royal tunic, to a royal jacket, visus, and the royal horse. Vashanit and kesa malchus. But they should place the crown of royalty on his head. And of course, Haman is thinking, he visualizes himself riding on the king's horse, wearing the king's outfit, wearing the king's crown. So the next pasuk says, Achashverosh says to Haman, Ma'ir kachas alavush v'sasus. Take the tunic, take the horse, and do it to Mordechai Yehudi. The crown disappears. And of course, in Pshutei shall make it, Achashverosh was very, very disturbed by any suggestion that the king's crown be placed on anybody's head but his own. So he cancels it. He says, take the horse and the tunic, no crown. But Chassidus analyze this on a mystical level. And Chassidus explains, and I'm going to make this very, very short, that Haman and Mordechai are like Esav and Yaakov. Haman and Mordechai are Tayu and Tikkun, like Esav and Yaakov are Tayu and Tikkun. Tayu is higher than Tikkun. Pardon me. And just as in the Chumash of the story in Yaakov and Esav, there is the birur of Esav through Yaakov. Esav is clarified and uplifted through Yaakov Avinu. In the Purim story, Haman is also clarified and uplifted through Mordechai. That's the mysticism, that's the subtext, that's what's hidden behind the external version of the story on a simple level. And accordingly, there's the horse and there is the garments. The horse represents Oisius, the letters, and the levush, the garment, represents the light of Tayu, and Haman says to Achashverosh, I will bring the levush and the sus, I will bring the garment and the horse, which represent the lights and the vessels of Tayu, to Mordechai. In other words, Tayu will give them to Tikkun. As far as the crown is concerned, pardon me, Haman offers, that means Tayu offers to bring the crown to Tikkun, and Achashverosh, which of course goes on HaKadosh Baruch Hu and God Almighty himself, that Achashverosh v'Reis Yeshaloi tells Haman the crown was always Mordechai's. Meaning to say, even though in Hishtalshalos Tayu is higher than Tikkun, Haman is higher than Mordechai, in the essence, in Akudim as it's called, Mordechai is higher than Haman, Tikkun is higher than Tayu, and the crown belonged to the Jews in the first place. And that's how Chassidus explains why the crown disappears. Not it disappears because Achashverosh doesn't want anybody himself wearing his crown, but because the levush and the sus comes from Mordechai to Haman, from Haman to Mordechai, but the sus is Mordechai's in the first place. So the Maamar Chassidus point out that since Haman represents Tayu, so the levush and the sus represent energies of Eilam HaTayu, which means to say, what is Tayu? Tayu is an extreme world, it's a polar world, it's an infinite world. And the levushim of Tayu, which goes on the susim of Tayu, which goes on the Oisius, is a very high level, meaning to say, in other words, in the Nimshal, in the mysticism that's connected to the tunic and to the horse, since the lights that are being delivered from Haman to Mordechai, from Torah to Tikkun are such high lights, the garments that's going to carry those lights has to be high lights as well. Meaning to say the choice of a horse as a metaphor for Isis is precise, because horses can run very fast, they have a lot of energy, they represent Kalim, they represent Isis, they represent vessels and vehicles that can deliver higher lights, that can deliver lights of Tayu as opposed to lights of Tikkun. Now how does that tie into an airplane? It's very obvious. Because an airplane is a Merkava, an airplane is a chariot, an airplane carries people from place to place, but it does it in an extraordinary way. It does it by raising them above the ground and moves at very, very great speed and doesn't need to have issues with traffic and so on. So the story with the airplane and the horse is quite aligned, actually, not just tongue-in-cheek, but you could use this analogy in a more meaningful way as well, because in the Purim story, the horse represents the conductor of the light, but the horse represents a conductor of a light which is going on higher than Elam HaTikn. Now, let's get to the Maamar. First of all, I need to tell you this. In Chassidic lore, what does the horse represent? In the tradition of Chassidus, what does the horse represent? When you say a horse to Chassidim in the last 7 generations, many, by the way, will refer to the Maimorim of Torah Or and Sharieda on Purim, because the horse and Purim go together very much. But if you would sit down with the average Chassidishe Yid and say, what does the horse mean to a Chassid? And the answer is the idea that when a Chassid travels to his Rebbe, he walks. He doesn't want to take a wagon, because then he's going to have to share Gan Eden mitafed. In the olden days, Chassidim didn't travel by train or by car, they traveled by horse and buggy. And if a horse brings you to the Rebbe, then your Gan Eden is going to be shared mitafed. And Chassidim, in many cases, when they didn't have the physical strength to walk to the Rebbe, preferred not to go than to travel by wagon. Because traveling by wagon meant sharing your Gan Eden with a horse, mitafed. By the Alter Rebbe himself, we know that the Maggid had given him specific instructions that he should travel by horse and wagon because he needs his strength, because his avodah in this world is going to be very difficult. And the Alter Rebbe's compromise was that he would walk to Mezrich, he wouldn't use a horse going, but he would travel home mitafed with a horse. If you wanted to explain this Chassidic attitude philosophically and mystically, if you wanted to say what is the mysticism behind traveling to the Rebbe with a horse or not traveling to the Rebbe with a horse, the answer is, do you want to travel to the Rebbe with the Yetzer Hara? Do you want to travel to the Rebbe only with the Yetzer Hatev? The horse represents the Yetzer Hara, even as the Yetzer Hara has been transformed, as you're going to see in tonight's class. And then the person says, I'm not going to the Rebbe mitafed. The Rebbe you bring only the Neshama. Now how significant this is and what this means on a meaningful level, on a useful level, I don't know, but I'm just sharing this with you, if you will, as a Dvad Tzachos, as a Gleich Vetel, because it is, after all, that of Purim. Let's get to the Maamar. What did we learn last week? First of all, last week, for the first time, we introduced ourselves to a Beuir. This is the first time we've ever learned a commentary on a Maamar of the Alter Rebbe, and as I explained it to you last week, the Alter Rebbe would say a Maamar, and then the very same week or within days he would say the Beuir on the Maamar. This Maamar is clearly a Beuir on the Maamar Vekebel Hayehudim. It's a more elaborate version of that Maamar, but it seems that there are quite a few additional aspects to that Maamar. What did the Maamar say? The Maamar said that Avraham Avinu brought down incredible lights, but Avraham Avinu had no vessels. The Matan Torah changed that because through mitzvahs we have vessels that conduct the light. Pardon me. However, here in the Beuir, much, much more than the Maamar itself, in the original Maamar, the Rebbe spoke about the vessels in 2 different ways. When the Rebbe spoke about the vessels, and he said, the Chiddush of Matan Torah is that now we have mitzvahs which can act as conductors, like garments that bring the light to a person. Like I gave you the analogy of the the beam of light coming from the flashlight and the dirty particles inside the beam, that the garments, that the vessels carry and conduct the light, the Rebbe made 2 points. The first point is the simple point. If you have no vessels, the light doesn't stay. But there was a second point. The second point is that the vessels have a very, very high source. And the vessels have to do with what fell from Elam Atayu. And the mitzvahs, as we know, are done for the most part by using physical things. And the physical things with which mitzvahs are done are not simply conductors of light. They are transformed klipa conductors of light. The physical mitzvahs come from sparks of tayu. In other words, they're from klipa. And klipa's source comes from tayu, which is higher than tikkun. And when you do a mitzvah with a physical thing, you're not simply creating a conductor for light. You are taking a klipa, a vessel, which comes from higher than Elam Atzilis, and by using it for a mitzvah, you're clarifying it and uplifting it and refining and elevating it, so it's not simply a conductor of light, it's a conductor of light which comes from a level which is higher than the light itself. In other words, if I wanted to say this in other words, when you use the word vessel, there's 2 concepts, or 2 levels. One vessel is I have a limited light and a limited vessel to carry that light. And another concept is I have a vessel to carry light, but the vessel is an infinite vessel. And because it's an infinite vessel, it can carry an infinite light. And that's how horses come into our conversation. Susim, horses represent vessels. Horses carry people, which means to say they are like a body for a soul, like Yossi is for Oira, that says in the Maimorim. But horses represent vessels that can travel very quickly because they have a very, very high source. And in this case, it's not simply vessels that are conducting light in a limited way, but vessels that because of their high source and the way they've been uplifted and corrected, that can conduct an infinite light. And that's what we're going to be learning about tonight, that we have a vessel that's a kli for Ein Sof, a vessel that can carry or conduct an infinite light, meaning to say that the Matan Torah didn't simply create conductors for light. Matan Torah created conductors for light that allow us to bring into this world an even higher light, a light which is more than the ordinary light. Says the Rebbe, Vehine, I'm on line 153. Inasmuch as we understand that the Jewish people who received the Torah Har Sinai are in one aspect higher than Avraham Avinu and the Avos, although they brought on incredible lights, but they didn't have vessels to conduct those lights. Pardon me, and we have vessels to conduct those lights. Moreover, that the vessels that we have to conduct those lights are not just limited vessels, but that the shadish, the root of these vessels, is from a very high source. And therefore they can conduct an extraordinarily high light. The Torah says, that Matan Torah has to do with Kvayachol, riding on a horse. And the Rebbe explains what's the significance of riding on a horse. That Sus is Begematria based Bamam Sag. Sus is 126, right? Samach is 60, 60 and 60 and 6 is 126. 126 divided by 2 is 63. Base Pamam Sag, 2 times 63 is 126. Sag is the same letters as the word Gas. Gas literally means to be haughty, to be a balgaive. But it's also an allusion to one of the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's a name of God Almighty which is Sag. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Hashem's name, Hashem's primary name is Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yud Kei Vav Kei is, the numerical equivalent of it is 26. But there's something called Milui. Milui means how you would write out Yud Kei Vav Kei. In other words, if you wouldn't simply write the 4 letters, but you would write the 4 letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei as though they were words. So then the Yud with Yud Vav Daled. How you spell Hey? You can either spell it Hey Yud, or Hey Hey, or Hey Aleph. How do you spell Vav? You can either spell it Vav Yud Vav, or Vav Aleph Vav, or Vav Vav. And accordingly, there are 4 levels in Shem Havaya. Shem Havaya, which is spelled with Yuds, is 72. Yud Vav Daled is 20. Hey Yud is 15, Vav, Yud Vav is 22, Hey Yud is 15, 15 and 15 is 30, 30 and 20 is 50, 50 and 2 is 72. On the opposite extreme, you have Bamili Alfin. Yud Vav Dal is 20, Hey Aleph is 6, Vav Aleph Vav is 13, Hey Aleph is 6, 6 and 6 is 12, 12 and 13 is 25, 25 and 20 is 45, Ma. And in between those two, you have 52 and 63. 63, Sag, is Havaya spelled with Yud, except that the Vav is, instead of being Vav Yud Vav, it's Vav Aleph Vav. The reason for this, I don't know, but what is true, what's important for us to know, is that Sag goes on Kesed. Of the 4 spellings of Yud Ke Vav Ke, Ma and Ban are in Atzilus. Really, Ma is Oides and Ban is Kelim. Sag is Kesed. So Sag really is Olam HaToyu. And Sag is Olam HaToyu after it's been transformed, because Sag is Hashem's name. Yud Ke Vav Ke is 63. Havaya, godliness that reveals itself in the world after the Birur and the Aliyah of the sparks, the Torah that fell, goes back to the Madrega of Sag. In other words, godliness which is higher than Atzilus, and it's godliness which is higher than Atzilus, which is in a good state. It's in an infinite state, but it's a healthy infinity rather than a chaotic infinity. And Sus is twice Sag. A horse represents this idea of godliness which is higher than Atzilus in 2 ways. And you'll see soon why 2. The Gemara says, Chazal tells about a horse, that his attitude, that his personality is one that's haughty, that's arrogant. Why do you have twice Sag in Sus? If Sag is 63, and 63 represents Hashem's name on this lofty level, why twice? Says the Rebbe, who beis bechina, because there's 2 aspects to the bringing forward the energy of Elam HaTehu after the Birur into the world. From the bottom up, from the bottom up to raise up the world until you go higher than Atzilus, and to bring the lights of higher than Atzilus down into the world to be able to correct it. So you have 2 Sags. Now let me just say this. From line 156 until line 172 is going to be the first one, Sag Malmata Lamaila. And from 172 until, let's say, 200 or something like that is going to be Milmaila Lamata. Okay, so we're going to have both of these things. So we're doing the first one first. Begins the Rebbe and he says, Upirush Milmata Lamaila. What does it mean? Earth rising up to heaven and not stopping in Atzilus, which would be Ma, but ascending higher than Atzilus to Ein Sof, which is Sag, says the Rebbe, the mashal, the example, the illustration, which helps us understand this concept of Sag, can be understood from Shabbos. What happens on Shabbos? The worlds have an aliyah, and we've talked about this in Schneur many times. We've even had complete classes that have discussed Shabbos. Let's talk first mashal. Right? We had this recently also in a Maamar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world through speech. You may recall we had once a Maamar where the Rebbe spoke not only about speech, but about ksav, handwritten words, written words, which is not dibur but ma'aseh. Ve'ein kan ha'makam laharach bazeh. Hashem created the world through speech. And of course, when a person speaks, they can only say one word at a time. And they have to concentrate on what they're saying. So you have a thought that encompasses many, many, many words. The thought you can think in an instant, but the words have to be spoken one after the next. And when you finish speaking, you rest. And when you finish speaking, all the different words that you spoke, one after the next, stretched out over time, are raised back up into that initial thought. It's like, for example, a person who has a fantasy about that he wants to do something, but when he goes ahead and does it, he can't be fantasizing or thinking about the pleasure he's going to get from it. He has to do it. Only when he finishes doing it and he's at rest does he go back to the place of pleasure, the place of fantasy and pleasure that he envisaged before he began to do the work. And that's the relationship between the weekdays and Shabbos. During the week, so he just came during the week, the godliness of Atzilus descends into the godliness of the lower worlds. Why is the godliness of Atzilus descending into the lower worlds? Not to illuminate the lower worlds, but punkvaker to the contrary. To collect sparks, and to separate sparks, and then ultimately to raise them up, during the days of the week. And of course, as you probably know, this is the reason on Friday night we say Eishes Chayil. Because Eishes Chayil means the neshama. And a whole week the neshama descends into the world to try to elevate sparks. On Shabbos, she comes home to her husband, and her husband is God Almighty. And you sing to the neshama, Eishes Chayil mi yimtza. And of course, if you think about the whole Eishes Chayil, it's describing how the neshama, there's the wife of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, goes out into the night and does business and trade and production and commerce, and everything that it does for the sake of her husband. Everything she brings to her husband. And her husband is, of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So during the week, the godliness of Atzilus descends into a place of uncleanness, of entanglement, of confusion, to elevate sparks. And on Shabbos it comes home. Says the Rebbe on line 159, Vaydeze b'Shabbos, when Shabbos comes, Hu aliyazun, the Atzilus which descended rises. Shaliyazuhi, and the nature of this ascent is al yedei bir nitutzim hanal. When this godliness of Atzilus, which descended into the lower worlds during the week to do bidur, returns to Atzilus, it doesn't simply go back to the place that it was earlier, it goes higher. Why? Because its return to Atzilus is not just with the power with which it descended into the lower world, it's with the power of what it acquired, of what it captured, of what it brings back. Sparks of godliness that were lost, that are now being uplifted. The Shosh from Gavaya Mizah, that these sparks which fell into the lower worlds have a source which is higher than Atzilus. Shehu Bechinas Shema. Atzilus is the level called Ma, which is Havaya in 45. Because these sparks which fell in the lower worlds fell because of the shattering. Mizayin Tachtein is the Sag. Notice the word Sag. Eila Mateyu is Sag. And the sparks of Kedusha fell in the Shviras Akelim of Sag. V'naflu b'shem ban, they fell into the level of ban, which is Shachas with Klippas. Ukashem misbated him, and we separate the good from the bad, and we raise them back up. Oilam l'sharsham, the sparks of Teyu, which fell lower than Tikkun, return to their source, which is higher than Tikkun. Bisag shulamayla mishem ma, which is higher than Atzilus. So the sparks fell lower, and their source is higher. So the neshama of Atzilus, the godliness of Atzilus, sent to the lower worlds, but it doesn't just go back to where it came from, it goes higher than where it came from. And accordingly also the love when Mashiach comes, when all of the sparks are going to be all corrected and perfected. The level of godliness which descends into the lower world is going to be higher than Atzilus, which is Shema, which is Atzilus. Why? Because since the lowest levels of godliness descended into the lower worlds to do birudim, they go back to the source from which the birudim came, where the sparks came from, which is higher than Atzilus. It ascends to the source of those sparks, which is Sag. And the Rebbe concludes, this is the concept Mashiach comes, which is called Shabbos. A whole 6,000 years is work. And the work is descending into a place of darkness and entanglement and confusion. Mashiach's coming is an rest and an ascent, not going back to the source from which the neshama came, but higher, to Eila Mateo. And the Rebbe says, although this happens specifically in the Elef Hashvi when Mashiach comes, but Shabbos in a small way, this happens every Shabbos. The whole week you're busy elevating sparks. The Shem Ban. And the sparks that are being elevated are in the lower level, which is called Ban. In the 6 weekdays, on Shabbos is a great ascent, to higher than Atzilus. Says the Rebbe, and the one of the ways of explaining what we just said is like the concept of reascent. When you reveal the lights of Teyu, which are higher than the lights of Tikkun. The Neshama starts off on Atzilus, which is Tikkun. And through the Yerida, by elevating these sparks, it doesn't only go back into Atzilus, but it goes to Teyu, which is higher than Atzilus. Line 168. So we described the Neshama's ascent from the lower worlds to the higher worlds after its engagement with Birudim like a horse. Shemelech lemayla ha'adam. That it raises the person up. The person goes down into a place of klipa. What's he looking for? He's looking for sparks of holiness. Those sparks of holiness are very powerful lights. And those powerful lights propel him, project him, catapult him upward, because there's kalim to go along with those lights. And those kalim also come from Eila Mateyu, and those kalim are sus. That zun, the levels of zun Atzilus are raised up milmata l'mayla from the lower level to a higher level. L'mark to such a place, shalayuchal lalas ba'asman, they could never go there on their own. Hainu l'mayla mishema dezah, higher than Atzilus. V'hu besag de bina. Technically speaking, this is in bina, but bina is considered higher than ishtalshus, which means keser. In other words, even though he says bina here, but bina really means tayu. Bina, which is why Bina is called the world of total freedom. There's no entanglement. The supernal jubilee. A place of complete freedom. How high a level is Bina, or in this case Kesed, Klipa cannot touch it. So the sparks fell, and you're raising them back up, and you're going to the shade. So what's the allusion to the horse? The horse is not the sparks. The horse is not the light. The horse is what carries it. So thinking about Avraham Avinu put out incredible light, but he had no vessels. We, in addition to being able to elevate these incredible lights, have a vessel to carry us back to our source, not only to Atzilus, to Elamateu. So this is the first allusion to a horse. And now remember, we're talking about Matan Torah now. We're not talking yet about Purim. We don't get to Purim until, line 212, or more precisely, line 220. In the meantime, we're simply talking about Matan Torah. The Eibishter gave us the Torah. And when he gave us the Torah, he didn't give us new light. The light we had from before. He gave us new vessels to carry the light. And in as much as he gave us two vessels, there's two concepts. Number one, he gave us vessels to conduct light altogether, to hold on to the light and to be warmed and illuminated altogether. And number two, since the vessels are such a high shadish, they reveal an incredibly high light. I'm on line 173 now. Ad kan susim mulmata lamayla. Until now we talked about a horse, which is a conductor of a very, very high light that raises us up after we engage in elevating the klipas. But there's another concept, and the other concept is the inyan milmayla lamata. The concept of the fair, the concept of the horse, which is from the top down. That means there's an idea of bringing incredibly lofty, godly lights, which are higher than Atzilus in the lower worlds in order to do what it needs to do. And the godly lights of Elamateu is not the horse. The godly lights of Elamateu is Elamateu. The horse is what carries that light to the lower worlds. In addition to the first idea that we just read, that the horse raises up the neshama and Atzilus till Bina, till Tayu, till Kesed, because it's elevating, it's clarifying and elevating the sparks that come from that level. Now we're going to speak a different concept, how the horse is carrying the highest lights which are higher than Atzilus, till the lowest worlds. Hainu shezeh guf. What is the concept of horse version 2, which means a conductor of a very high light, which can be brought to a very low level? The idea is that this itself, that we discussed before Liadi's Biter, in order for us to be able to effect a clarification, which means a separation and an uplifting, and transforming emotions that are otherwise entangled, and raising them up to the Eibishter, all the way back to Elamateu, the very idea that he takes sparks and you lift them up, needs a koyach. And now we're talking about the koyach, which is the precursor, which sets the stage, which comes before the Biter itself. Who, why the Amshachami Bina requires bringing down from higher than Atzilus Bina. Shu B'china Sag, which is the Madreg of Tayu and Madreg of Keser, higher than Ishtalshalos. You see, the Maamar explains the horse in two ways. From a chronological perspective, from a practical perspective, what he says second, he should say first, because it happens first. First, you have to have a special koyach to elevate sparks, and then you have a special reward once the sparks are elevated. For whatever reasons, he chooses to put what is chronologically second first, that when you finish elevating the sparks, you go back to the source, and what's chronologically first, second, that the power to be able to elevate the sparks, the power to be able to go into the lower worlds and elevate them, has to come from the highest of levels. I'm sure there's explanations why, and maybe even we know those explanations, but we're going to leave it alone. Just pointing it out. Ukmai Sfira Saimen. There's a concept of Sfira Saimen. Sfira Saimen means counting days. But you also know the word Sfira Saimen, for the word Sfira means to bring a light, a shine, to what is otherwise animalism. Shehu, that Sfiras Ha'emet is, Birur Zayin Midas the Nefesh HaBahamis, bringing a clarity to the 7 emotional attributes of the animal soul. And what is the animal soul? The animal soul is passion. The animal soul is polarity. The animal soul is inexactitude. Right? If I love too much. If I love the wrong things. If I love demonstratively. If I love with such passion that I hurt the people next to me. If I'm exact and precise, I end up hating. Everything on the emotional level is inexact, is imprecise. It's not bad, but it's not perfect. And there's something called bitter, to refine the 7 emotions. Says the Rebbe, bitter, zayin, midas, the nefesh habahamis. If one wishes to refine their emotional attributes, which means I can love God and not burn the people around me. I can fear God, not hate the people less than myself. The ability to refine an unrefined thing has to come from a higher source than the thing which is unrefined. From Bina, which is higher than the Midas. That's the meaning of the Pasuk, the power to bring clarity to the human emotions and to perfect them and to refine them and to make them more subtle comes from higher than Shabbos. In other words, Shabbos, pardon me, Chassidus explains that Bina is called higher than Shabbos, and only from a level which is higher than Shabbos. In other words, if you want to elevate, if you want to bring correction to something which is incorrected, you need a power from somewhere which is above incorrection or the need for correction. For me to fix you, I have to be fixed in myself. Like I've discussed with you in the past on a number of occasions, that b'chokhma is beriru. Birurim begins with chokhma and chokhma stima v'cholu because they're above klip. Similarly, if we are going to descend into this world and elevate the sparks of godliness which are lost, we need a koyach from higher, and this koyach from higher comes from sag. Says the Rabbi on line 176, you have a medrash which gives an example of a mother wiping away her son's filth. So Kabbalistically, the mother is Bina, and her son is the Midas. When it comes Yom Kippur, and Hashem forgives us for our sins. So you have the expression Neisei Oven. How does the Eibishter tolerate and even transform our sins? The answer is you have to have the mother, which is Bin. Kain V'ayin sham shekol zeh hatikun. That this entire tikkun is the litchas hachetzein mizun, is to push away klipa from zon of atzilus. Shu dafka, in order to do this, it requires amshachas rabina, bringing down a light which is higher than atzilus, mibifnim mibchutz v'chulu. V'hu inyan levush chashmal lebina, which is the garment of chashmal lebina, shamal b'sh lezun b'shvil shel yinkum hem hachetzeinim, in order for klipa not to get. And of course, the conclusion is that he calls that the abina. Now, if you think I didn't explain that paragraph well, you're right, I didn't. I didn't even daven it, right? I cheated you. I don't want to go into the intricacies, into the subtleties of this paragraph because it's very technical. But the spirit of this paragraph is that engagement has an upside and a downside. If I want to get involved with you, there's a good side and a bad side. Now you, of course, are wonderful. What if you're not so wonderful? So my involvement with you would mean that something which is above those challenges is deliberately engaging itself in a challenge. What protects the mevarer, the one trying to make the correction, from losing, from being swallowed up by the mispah, the one he's trying to correct? And the answer is that there's something above it which he's connected to. It's called chashmal. There's Grada Purim Maimer, which speaks about chashmal. There's Makifim of Bina, Tafresh Nun Dalat from the Rebbe Rashab, a long Maimer, where he explains chashmal. And basically chashmal means a very high level of light and a madrega of makif that protects. And like I said to you before, without going into the subtleties and intricacies of this paragraph, the point is that if Kedusha is going to come down into Klippa and elevate it, Kedusha is going to need to be fortified, protected, and the fortification and the protection that Kedusha is going to need is going to be from a level of light and holiness which is so high that it's above the entire realm or arena of the challenge. And because it's above the challenge, it can protect Kedusha from becoming swallowed up by the Klippa it's trying to correct. Line 181 is a Yuvan in Sus. And that's the mystical concept of a horse, but in this case it's Shemul Maila Lamata, from heaven to earth, how incredibly high lights are being brought down, carried on the backs of these horses, so to speak. to give power that when Kedusha engages with Klipa should win and not lose. That Chanin shachafil lamata b'makam haKlipas. It descends very low to the place of Klipas. So that Levadet should be able to bring a clarity to Klipa, v'lahapech, and be able to transform Klipa, that Hamid is the human emotions which are by themselves inexact, in order to correct the inexact emotions and make them exact, you have to have a koyach, which is higher than the possibility of inexactitude, and that comes from Kesef. You're a human being, yeah? You have a Yetzer Tev and Yetzer Hara. Your Yetzer Hara has bad midas, everything is polar and extreme and inexact and imprecise. Yetzer Tev has good midas, but you see, Yetzer Tev and Yetzer Hara are equal. And because your Yetzer Tev and Yetzer Hara are equal, ein lahem keach. The midas of your Yetzer Tev are not strong enough, kol kach, to be able to fight the midas of the Nefesh Bahamas. To the contrary, they're going to get involved in the inexactitudes of the behemoth, they're going to lose. Because the midas of Kedusha and the midas of Klipa are in the same madrege, not only are the midas of Kedusha not assured that they'll be able to defeat Klipa, they may very well lose. I'm sorry I'm being so almost cynical. I'm saying, I keep saying the word afed, which is a Yiddish word for horse, because I want to underscore the point. This is coming from someplace much higher. Shehu amshacha debina, because it's bringing down a higher light, therefore hamalich and kolkach lamat, that brings it so low to elevate. The power to get involved with filth and transform it and uplift it without becoming destroyed ourselves comes from a higher level. So this is the second horse. The first horse is the horse that carries you home. You got involved with the shmutz. When you go home, you're being carried home on a horse. The second horse, which is chronologically before the first horse, is the koyach to descend into that shmutz and bring correction to it without becoming swallowed up by it. So the Rebbe says on line 185, in case you didn't understand the mystical significance of the horse, which descends with us into Klipa and gives us a koyach to elevate it. Says the Rebbe, al derech mashal, give an example. And we see hefresh ben haseichel and midas. What's the difference between your intellect and your emotion, between your mind and your heart? Sha'aseichel, the human mind, yesh bekeiche lispel davar shu seini betachlis. Your mind can conduct something. Your mind can conduct something which you can totally hate. What does that mean? Your brain, your intellectual brain, is dispersonal. It's distant from you. So you can understand things you don't agree with. You can even understand things you hate. You can contemplate it, and consider boy. You can think about it intellectually, just like you would think about something which you absolutely love. You could visualize it in your fantasy and in your thought that although you despise it, you loathe it. But because you're being intellectual about it, there's a distance. Intellectually, you can tolerate, you can engage in something you dislike. Emotionally, you can't do that. There's something you don't like. The feelings are so disturbing, they're so disruptive, you can't feel them. Line 188, when one intellectually contemplates anything. When you contemplate something, you are intellectually engaging and relating to that thing. And your brain at that time is embracing the thing you're analyzing. Say, for example, you want to undertake a project of cleaning up a mess. Now, you know how you're going to clean up your mess? You're going to put on a mask, and you're going to put on overalls, and you're going to use gloves, and you're going to get down into the waste and clean it up. But the engineer, the scientist, the person who contemplates cleaning it up doesn't get dirty at all. Looks at it objectively from a distance and says, this should be cleaned up, and it will be cleaned up. And of course, the nimshal is the human mind is above the actual struggle between good and evil, and therefore it's able to empower good to win and evil to lose. And accordingly, when you intellectually think and contemplate something you despise, even this despised phenomenon is embraced by your brain. As a consequence, your brain is brought down to embrace this evil thing. In other words, your imagination and your thought, your intellect, could descend very low. That to engage in something which is very far away from it, to the degree that he hates it, in order to be able to have power to uplift it. Nevertheless, he will embrace it in his thought, he'll contemplate in it. I'm turning to page 192 now. What is the point, Rabbi side? The point is that when you have to get involved in filth, you need to be connected to something whose involvement in the filth is pure, is indirect. And that's what the brain provides. 192 Moshenken Amidus. The human emotions. When the human emotions engage with animal emotions, it's a fair fight. She'ein midas ha'ava, the love of the divine soul, does not have the fortitude that yechedel is pashav davashu sanei to be able to engage with something that it hates. The emotional attributes of your intellectuals, of your godly soul, cannot relate to the emotional attributes of your animal soul, but your brain can. The reason for this is, when you feel something, you become one with it. And when you become one with it, you have to be able to suffer it. And you can't suffer something that you hate. Your brain, when it relates to something evil, it's intellectual, it's, to use a modern day term, it's academic, it's impersonal, and therefore you can engage intellectually in something you despise. Your brain can go lower. So it's an ironic thing. Your brain is higher than your heart. Your transcendent godliness is higher than your applied godliness. And yet your brain and your transcendent godliness can go to places of filth that your heart, that your applied godliness can never go. Says the Rebbe on line 194, the same is true on high. The dav k'mebechinas bina, when you bring down a koyach, which is higher than ishtalshalos, yuchali mosher gam lamata, you can descend very low. I feel it makam klipas, even to the place of the klipas. She'akadosh baruch hu yedei gam ma'aser hashem. God Almighty knows what the Shem are going to do also. Umizbein and behem k'mei ma'aser tzadikim, he's as aware of them as the act of tzadikim. How could the Eibush know about what the Shem are doing? How could the Eibush know what the Shem are doing precisely the same way as he knows what tzadikim are doing? They're evil. And the answer is because on the level of Makiv, everything is the same. Mashenkin midas ahava, on the level of emotions, it's impossible for the emotions of the tzaddik to be engaged in what is evil, because on an emotional level, you cannot relate to what's evil. So Sag represents what? Sag represents a koyach of godliness, which is above the struggle between good and evil, that empowers good to be guaranteed the victory. Line 201, this second horse, which brings an Ein Sof, which is higher than Ishtalshalos, down, later to descend, Ulavaran, to bring a clarity to Hamides, the emotional attributes which by themselves entangled and confused, and the transforming in darkness into light, during the 6 weekdays. Which is the same idea as Machshava Teva Kadosh Baruch Hu Mitzafa Lamaisa, that the good thought, Hashem uses it to heal the action. In other words, the good thought is higher than the action, and the good thought heals the action. According to that measure, Nasa Achakach, then there's a future ascent, which is Lamata Lamayla B'Shabbos V'Chulu. And again, this is what I told you before. The Alter Rebbe, for some reason, brings the second point first, and the first point second. What's the first point? The first point is that you have to have a koyach to descend and elevate sparks that protects you from something which is above the struggle altogether. And the second point is that when you finish elevating the sparks, there's a special koyach that allows you to go back to the source, and both of these things are infinite lights that are being carried on horses. Line 204, the mother hovers above the chicks. The mother has to be sent off. And the mother is being on the midas the children. The idea of the mother hovering is on the mother, bina. And the kuz, which is higher than Ishtalshalos, lowers itself to be involved in the inexact world. A mother has to watch her mother's filth. Then there is an ascent from the bottom to the top. What is the ascent from the bottom to the top? After godliness is brought down to bring a clarity to otherwise entangled worlds, you go back to Elokus. What is the simple reading of this pasuk? What is the simple reading of this pasuk? The simple reading of this pasuk is you send away the mother, and once the mother is gone, you can take the young. But Kabbalistically, at least here, he explains exactly the opposite. Sending away the mother means raising the mother back to her source. Vesabonam tikach lach means that the children are also being uplifted. You descend to bring clarity to klipa, and that's the first sag. And then you reascend to bring the klipas, which has now been clarified, back to their shadish, and that's the second concept of sag. Sag milmaila lamata comes first, and sag milmata lamaila comes second, even though in the Maamar they were discussed in reverse order. V'lachein, which explains in conclusion line 207, Nema b'matan Torah, when the Eibush gave her the Torah, it says, Ki tirkav al susech, that the event of the giving of the Torah is Hashem riding on a horse. In other words, first of all, the mitzvahs are vessels that conduct lights of ma'av atzilas. And second of all, mitzvahs deal with physical things that have to do with klipa. Commission is bial, discussed last week. Ubehem tzarech liyas abir, and therefore need to be corrected. And when they are corrected, first of all, there has to be a koyach which comes from heaven to earth, from higher than ishtalsus, to give koyach to elevate sparks without being swallowed up by them. And then afterwards you have aliyah milmata lamal, the reascent from the bottom to the top. So now let's go back to Avraham Avinu. And this Maamar is not so simple. The Maamar starts off by saying Avraham Avinu brought back down a light of Sevav Kalam and he had no vessels. What makes us special? We also have vessels, but now we know it's a lot more complicated than that. The specialness of Yidden is not only that they have vessels, but that the vessels have such a high source, and therefore they're bringing down a much, much higher light. So I suppose you could say there's two things that are advantageous to us over the others. The very idea that we have vessels of Ma, moreover that the idea is that we're bringing down vessels from a very high level, and therefore we're raising ourselves back, not only till Ma, till Atzilas, but Elam Atei, which is even higher. Line 212. V'chein bepurim nema, which explains by Purim you have these two ideas. You have levush malchus, and you have sus. Remember I told you before, the kesser, the king's crown, is eliminated. The garments and the horses. Says levush malchus. What's the garment of levush and benasma ma'isa mitzvahs? The garment that's created from the deeds of mitzvah shebidur kanal. V'hu ayedei v'sus asher rochav agem. What allows the sparks to be elevated and to be brought into kedusha? The koyach that comes from the sus, that comes first from heaven to earth, and the koyach that comes from the sus, which then elevates, which comes from earth to heaven. Now, in the spirit of Purim, let me finish by mentioning again Itzke Gansberg, Reb Yitzchak Gansberg, Rav Yitzchak Gansberg, that he used to say that when you get on an airplane, the first thing they tell you is you have to buckle up and you can't smoke. So he would explain it to Pipnimis and Yonim. He says, you want to raise yourself, number one, you have to buckle up. You have to tie yourself down, attach yourself to the source, tie yourself to the Rebbe, to the Nasi Adar. And number two, you have to make sure not to blow air. Make sure that whatever it is that you are is substantive and real and not superficial and fake. And we'll finish the Maamar next week. Bli neder.